How do you get the most money by selling your vehicle using a private sale? Hello, and welcome to Auto Be Careful, the place for car safety. I'm Gene, and we just sold our 2017 Subaru Outback for 50% more than what dealers were offering us. Let's talk about how we did it, what some of the risks were, and what we did to protect ourselves. Let's talk about getting the vehicle ready for sale. We did a fair amount of work to get our vehicle ready for sale, most of which wasn't required. The first thing we need to talk about is the title. The title is the proof of ownership of the vehicle, and it is essential for selling the vehicle. If the vehicle has been paid off, the owner should know where the title is. If the vehicle has not been paid off, the title is most likely with the lender. In any case, the owner of the vehicle needs to know how to get the title of the vehicle to the buyer. We also obtained a vehicle history report and did a pre-purchase inspection on the vehicle, but neither of these are required. In most cases, private party vehicle sales are considered as is, meaning that the buyer is accepting the condition of the vehicle as it is when the vehicle sale takes place, and any problems that occur after the vehicle sale are the buyer's problem. It is possible that the buyer could pursue damages from the seller after the sale is completed if the seller was aware of issues with the vehicle that they did not disclose to the buyer, but this is incredibly hard to pursue. Nevertheless, we decided to get these reports in order to feel confident in the vehicle we were selling, give the buyer added peace of mind, and hopefully protect ourselves from any disputes that might happen later on. Another thing that we did was gather up all of the service history documentation about the vehicle. This isn't required and not everyone does this, but it can help fill in gaps in the vehicle history report. If these records are being included in the sale of the vehicle, we feel it's important to redact any personally identifying information from these records before they get handed over to the buyer. That includes things like names, addresses, phone numbers, license plate numbers, especially if they're personalized, and customer IDs. While the next owner of the vehicle will most likely get the current owner's name and address from the title of the vehicle, subsequent owners will not, but they may be able to get that information if they get their hands on the service history records. So if you want to avoid getting a phone call from the vehicle's 7th owner in 10 years, it can be helpful to redact this information from those records. Next, it's time to physically prepare the vehicle and write a great ad for it. We cleaned the vehicle inside and outside and took some wonderful photos of it. I'm especially proud of the lead photo we took for the ad because we scoped out an adventurous looking location for an adventurous vehicle and woke up early to take some beautiful photos at sunrise. Again, it can be really helpful to either remove or hide the license plates for these photos, especially if the license plates are personalized and will be retained. We also wrote a great ad for the vehicle, highlighting the many wonderful features of the car and the known flaws. Finally, it's time to actually list the vehicle. There are many ways to approach this, but I usually focus on an online ad to get the broadest range of potential buyers. There are several platforms where a vehicle can be listed for sale, including AutoTrader, Cars.com, and Craigslist. Unfortunately, all of these platforms charge some money just to list the vehicle. We decided to start with Facebook Marketplace, which was free, and if we didn't have much luck, we would go with one of the other options. Fortunately, we received a ton of responses in the short amount of time that the vehicle was listed there. Using Facebook Marketplace, we were able to find a buyer exactly 10 days after the vehicle listing went live. The process of meeting buyers is incredibly stressful. It's important to keep yourself safe, especially when large amounts of money are involved. There is a ton of advice out there for this part of the process, but for me, some of the most important things are meeting in a public place, bringing someone with you if you can, and trusting your instincts. If your instincts are telling you something isn't right, it is totally okay to walk away and find another buyer. During a test drive, I usually ride in the vehicle with the potential buyer in order to deter theft, but this does run the risk that I could be injured if the driver gets into a collision. Speaking of collisions, If one does occur during a test drive, it will typically fall back on the seller and the seller's insurance to pay for the damages under what's called permissible use. For me, this is by far the most stressful part of the process, and it is not for everyone. If this sounds like it's a bit too much, it might be more appealing to sell the vehicle to a dealer, even if that means not getting the best price. Now let's talk about actually selling the vehicle. Traditionally, this happens when the buyer hands the seller money and the seller hands the buyer a title. However, if one of the parties is being deceitful, this runs the risk of the other party losing a lot. There are definitely ways to protect yourself during these transactions, including having the transaction done at a bank to verify funds or at the DMV to verify title. However, when the amount of money gets into the 5-digit range, I like to have a little bit more peace of mind. When buying something big, like a house, there are companies called escrow companies that verify payment from the buyer and the deed from the seller in order to ensure that the transaction goes smoothly. I decided to look for something similar for vehicle purchases, which is how I found a company called KeySavvy. KeySavvy is a company that handles the vehicle sale transaction. What that means is that the seller is still responsible for finding a buyer, including gathering documentation, taking great photos, advertising the vehicle, meeting potential buyers, handling test drives, and completing required vehicle testing. What KeySavvy does is verify the payment for the seller and the title for the buyer. On the payment side, they're able to verify the buyer's identity and validate the funds. That means no visits to a bank to verify cash or checks, and they guarantee that the seller will get paid once they complete the required steps. On the title side, they validate the identity of the seller, they validate that the seller actually owns the vehicle, they run a title search to see if the vehicle is clean, rebuilt, salvage, or something else, and they make sure that the vehicle has undergone any required emissions or safety testing. They guarantee that the buyer receives a clear title. The first step is for the seller to sign up for KeySavvy, create a profile, and add a vehicle to that profile. That includes uploading a copy of the title, the current registration, and a photo of the odometer. I was able to do all of this the morning that I met my potential buyer. Once the buyer and seller have agreed on sale terms, the buyer uses the seller's link to start the purchase process. This is where KeySavvy verifies the identity of the buyer and the seller through photos of identification and a face scan, and verifies that the seller actually owns the vehicle by making sure that the photo of their identification matches the information on their title and registration. They then issue a title report to the buyer and seller to show if the title is clean, salvage, rebuilt, or something else, which gives the buyer confidence before they submit payment. Once this is done, they make sure all of the paperwork is in order and allow the buyer to submit the payment. At this point, the seller can, but is not obligated to sign the title and mail it to KeySavvy. If there is a lien on the title, KeySavvy can work with the lender to remove the lien and obtain the title. In my case, the process paused here because I needed to complete and upload proof of the safety and emissions testing required by my state before KeySavvy would allow the process to continue. That meant I had to wait until the next day for one of those testing facilities to open up so I could complete the process. My buyer also declined to submit payment until that was completed. I completed the testing and uploaded the passing test results the day after I signed up for KeySavvy. My buyer submitted the payment the next day after that, and KeySavvy let me know shortly after the payment was submitted that I could hand the keys over to the buyer. That same day, I mailed the title via 2-day shipping to KeySavvy, and the buyer and I agreed to meet 2 days after that to hand over the keys and the vehicle. On the day of the handoff, we transferred the vehicle over, KeySavvy received and processed the title, and the payment was in my bank account by the end of the day. One thing that's important to understand is that KeySavvy processes this transfer as 2 separate transactions. KeySavvy first buys the vehicle from the seller and then sells the vehicle to the buyer. Once they confirm the funds from the buyer, which can happen in as little as 30 minutes, they begin the process of purchasing the vehicle from the seller. That means the seller is getting paid from an established company and not someone they just met. That provided me with confidence that I was going to get paid and not scammed with fake paper bills or a fraudulent check. KeySavvy then sells the vehicle as a dealer to the buyer. This allows KeySavvy to make sure the title is clear for the buyer, plus it provides some additional benefits. KeySavvy is able to connect the buyer with financing options in case the buyer wants to finance the purchase, and they're able to issue a temporary registration so the buyer can drive the vehicle right away. That last part was really helpful for us because we had personalized license plates on our vehicle, which we had to keep, so the buyer needed proof of ownership in order to drive the vehicle. There are two additional pieces that I want to mention. First, KeySavvy automatically generates a bill of sale with the vehicle being noted in as-is condition. That makes it explicitly clear that the buyer is responsible for their own due diligence because there is no warranty on the vehicle. Combined with the fact that the seller is technically selling the vehicle to KeySavvy helps protect the seller from any disputes that may happen after the sale. The other thing I want to mention is that the funds are not released to the seller until the buyer has confirmed that they have taken possession of the vehicle and KeySavvy has received and processed the title. KeySavvy allows the buyer to back out of the transaction at any time until they confirm possession of the vehicle, and they can do this straight from the website. The entire process, with the exception of mailing the title to KeySavvy, can be completed in one day, although KeySavvy does take a little bit of time to process certain steps. I think this is a great benefit because it helps force the transaction to slow down and give each party time to think to ensure that both parties are happy with the transaction. If there are any issues with the title, KeySavvy works with the seller to resolve them, but it isn't exactly clear what happens if they cannot resolve them. Presumably, the buyer can still get their money back, since funds cannot be released to the seller until the title is clear and ready to be transferred, but it isn't exactly clear what happens from their website. In the end, it took 4 days to complete the entire process, and the delays were caused by myself or the buyer. Based on this experience, I would definitely recommend KeySavvy as a service when doing a private sale transaction for a vehicle because it protects both the seller and the buyer, ensuring a smooth transaction for both. So that's a look at how we sold our 2017 Subaru Outback for 50% more than what dealers were offering using a private sale transaction, some of the risks that were involved, and what we did to protect ourselves. Next, we're going to reveal what vehicle we purchased to replace that Outback, so stay tuned. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click the like button below and subscribe to see more content like this.